Hello, welcome to the world of Word.
Coming up, another word in your attic.
And if you enjoy this, visit our Patreon to find out more about our exclusives and our general work of national importance.
The link is in the notes below. And now, on with the show.
Word in your attic, a Zoom with a view.
It's another instalment of Word in Your Attic, and we are absolutely delighted to be joined by the music writer Rob Chapman. Rob, where do we find you? Where are you?
You find me in Todmorden on the Lancashire-Yorkshire border.
Nice.
This is the borderlands, and every bit as edgy as Tex-Mex, but without the food or the music.
There's a place that whenever it's referred to on the national news, it's always called Todmorden.
That's right.
Which to anybody from Yorkshire or Lancashire is nonsense. It's Todmorden.
We just call it Todd, to be honest. But,
there you go.
Yeah,
Todd.
But that's right, Todmorden. It's always a giveaway.
Yeah, it is.
Like Leicester, yeah.
Yes.
Leicester. Leicester Square, as American tourists always used to say. Rob, it's brilliant. Well, look, you've written a book called Ad Lib, Repeat to Fade. It's a fantastic book. A really, really fantastic book.
Thank
it's
you.
a memoir. And, wonderful bits about your childhood and teenage. It's mostly about your relationship with music, actually. And so, you'll have a few things to show us that might illustrate the book. But I mean, can you remember what kind of records were playing in the house when you were growing up? Your parents are very big on novelty hits, I think.
Well, I don't know about novelty
remember the kind of things that were.
That was just the acute. There's a chapter in the book called My Parents' Randomly Average Record Collection.
Yeah.
Because I figure that most people anyway, unless they were hi-fi buffs or true collectors, the other 99.9% of the population just accumulated records on a very casual basis. There were no genres in those days. There was no purpose to your it wasn't even collecting, it was accumulation, random accumulation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what we had there, I mean, the fact is we had so few records, I could actually all these years later name them. The ones that we had up until Beatlemania took hold and I started buying the occasional record myself. Yeah, we had a couple of singles by the Vernon's Girls, pre-Beatles. They were so named because they worked at the Vernon's Pools company in Liverpool, and they were a cracking band. We had a couple of Lonnie Donegan singles, My Old Man's a Dustman, obviously, and the follow-up Lively, which was banned by the BBC because it made reference to it made a reference to an old deer having sex or praying to God for sex. So put those combinations together in the early 60s.
Incendiary.
And put in my radio researcher's hat on for a minute. I've done the research at Colindale. At Caversham. I've been through the BBC archives. And that you couldn't mention God on a record at that time. That would have been, tantamount to anarchy in the UK at the time, basically. Yeah. And so the follow-up Lively we had a couple of singles on the Embassy label.
I was delighted to read about the Embassy label. Explain to those people who never had to endure it what the Embassy label was all about.
It was a kind of cut-price label run by Woolworths, which basically remade the hits of the day in the style of. And they obviously had some very good session singers. And in fact, I think it was the brainchild. No, that was the Top 6 series. Yes, we also had a Top 6 record, which was another aspect of all that. Wind back.
Those were the records that your aunt would get you for Christmas.
Yes. So Embassy Records, yeah. We had Strawberry Fair by Not Anthony Newley, and we had Sunrise by Not Rolf Harris. Although I don't know why my parents didn't have the Anthony Newley original, because they were big Anthony Newley fans. Right. My mum a big fan of the music, and my dad a big fan of his comedy. So, so we had Embassy Records, and you could get them. You could buy them out of a skip in Woolworths. I think this emphasises the sort of peripheral nature of the things. You could reach into this little wire skip and they would just be in there like landfill. You could just put your hand in and pull one out,
Yeah.
So
I can recommend the amount of detail in this book. I've just flipping it this morning, and you got the list of all the cigarettes that were on sale at the time. Which
so nostalgic.
Never fails to take you back. And obviously there's Embassy and things like that. But Tellers the brand of cigarettes your dad used to smoke?
My dad used to smoke Guards.
Guards.
That's right. God, doesn't it bring it all back? It's amazing.
I hadn't thought about Guards.
I know. I can just see the packet now.
Yeah. I have to say, is you call it a list of cigarettes, but what it is, it's at the period when I was a deviant little pre-teenage smoker, and I arranged them in the formation of a football team with the goalkeeper, 2 fullbacks,
Right, yes,
that's right.
3 middle backs, and 5. And that's the joke. I do it later on with Legion of Superheroes, Superman comics as well, because there's no sport in the book whatsoever. It's not a sporty memoir. I could have done the same book just on sport, but I thought, as you say, you have to kind of concentrate on something, and music is the line that runs through my entire life.
Yeah.
Better off or worse, and so it's all music based, yes. But at that period when we were deviant little cigarettes, we weren't stealers. What we discovered very early on, at the age of about 9 or 10, I was enthralled to I won't say an older boy because he was younger than me. He showed me that you could put toy money or Commonwealth coins into cigarette machines, and you could put your New Zealand 2 and 6 in, press the button, pull the tray, and out would come 10 cigarettes. And so what we were onto that for a while. That was our big heist for about 6 or 8 months, until the forces of law and order, or rather the carriage owner, realised when he emptied his machine, found all these Commonwealth coins, and even my sister's toy money from her toy. You often got that toy money that you could put in a little toy till, you have your own little sweet shop and everything, Even they, I think, carefully weighted with an elastic band or something, they would also run through as well. This is all highly illegal stuff, and I thought we might talk more about my glorious journalism career rather than my expertise as a 10-year-old.
We used to do this with parking meters. We used to do this with parking meters and the ring pulls from beer cans later on. Worked a treat.
Yes, I heard.
Yes, it rendered them bust, and you could put a little sign on it saying,
but whether you're interested in the music or not, this book is a wealth of details like that if you grew up in the 50s or 60s will reawaken whole areas of your life. It did for me, just from flipping it. I
have that kind of memory. The thing is, I'm blessed or burdened, however you want to look at it, with impeccable recall, which is good in many.
You are.
It's
absolutely astonishing.
And I thought I remembered a lot of stuff until I looked at this. Go on,
incredible detail.
And so I mean, you remember stupid little things like walking along the road one day in 1969 and hearing Tony Blackburn play a record on the Plum label and going, that's a fruity label. 2 weeks later, there's a Record Mirror comes out, and there in the bottom corner of the back page is one of those little box ads with an advert for that very record, and going, there's a fruity record, says Tony Blackburn.
There you go.
And it's stuff like that. It's the stupid minutiae of everything that I remember.
There's one amazing detail where you talk about being at school when the Beatles happened, and you have this game where one lot of you pretends to be the Beatles, and the other lot pretends to be the people chasing the Beatles. That
happened completely spontaneously. I was walking past the infant school that I had attended the year before. I'd left then. I was in the first year of junior school. These children came up to the gate and said to me, and I was with a couple of friends of mine, the Ellery twins. They were twins, Peter and Paul Ellery. And they said, you pretend you're the Beatles and we'll chase you around the playground. So that's what we did. We went into the playground and we had to be John, Paul and George. And kids ran screaming around the playground until finally a teacher, obviously who was on playground duty, came to see what all the commotion was about and said something to the effect of, you boys don't go to this school anymore, do you? Could you please vacate the premises? But what I did with the book, the Beatles reoccur throughout the book. Obviously, they have to. But everything that needs to be said about the Beatles, I think, pretty much has been said. And so I thought, if I'm going to mention the Beatles here in the book at all, I'm just going to do it purely through paraphernalia and fandom and stuff like that. And that is a running thread. If you notice in that book, the Beatles are mentioned several times. I never once talk about the music.
No, that's true. There's a bit where there's the aniseed balls or something. You get a free Beatles ring. And how you collect all the rings because you want to look like Ringo.
That's right. Brilliant. Licorice sticks, a penny a stick.
Licorice stick.
And I think if you bought 5, they came with a free ring. Yeah. And so you gorged yourself on licorice and walked around with these, gaudy little things on your hands, Yeah, we all did that. If you'd have zoomed into my street at the height of Beatlemania, all these hard little boys and sons of hard farmers walking around, bejeweled with plastic, 9-carat plastic. Yeah. And we had a Beatles tea tray as well. Yeah. Which you see it on eBay now for about 50 or 100 quid. Beatles tea tray. And I always remember that because we lived in a hard water area, and so you got a lot of limescale, and we put the kettle on it, and after a while the kettle boiling over just kind of eroded the faces of the Beatles, and so they just all gradually disappeared as the erosion spread outwards, and you would just end up with a bit of Paul's chin or John's forehead or whatever, and this fascinated me as a kid. That's the kind of, if you like that kind of detail, folks, about the Beatles and not what they're really singing in the backmasking bits, read my book.
It's the stuff you won't read anywhere else, and there's no higher recommendation than that, really.
That was my to be honest, David. That's my criteria for writing these days.
Right.
If it's already been said, you've got to have a damn good reason for saying it again. You've either got to have a brand new perspective, or don't bother saying it at all because that's all been done.
Yeah.
So, do you keep much stuff yourself? Have you got anything you could do the traditional show and tell about?
Show and tell? Well, mentioning my parents' randomly average record collection, the one record from that period that I did retain, which was one of my dad's big favourites, is Figures with Unwin.
Oh, yeah.
I still have
Professor Stanley Unwin.
Oh, yeah, which has a track on it called The Pidy Piper Load of Hamling. Isn't that right?
Track one.
Yes.
That's right.
I don't remember.
Followed by Goldie Loppers and the Three Bear Loaders. Yeah. I came very early to Stanley Unwin.
You did. I didn't discover him till the Small Faces, actually.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where most people did. I've been onto him for 6 years by then, Yeah, I mean, this record was played to death in my house. And, of course, you just revel in the absolute nonsense of it, even as a child. And I was very influenced by my dad's sense of humour anyway. He had a cracking sense of humour. We were much more of a BBC than an ITV house. And Galton and Simpson were gods. Hancock and Steptoe were gods. Right. Sergeant Phil Silvers was an absolute titan. Bill was a god. And my dad was one of those people, he didn't laugh lightly at stuff. He didn't suffer fools gladly. So if something made him laugh, you knew it really was damn funny. Uh-huh. And it was like this. And he would howl at this album. And I would howl along with him. It's wonderful. And I still play it to this day.
Just hold it up. Just hold up the cover again, Rob.
Isn't the title brilliant?
Because
Rotating discos.
What fascinates me is so many of the early comedy records were plays on the idea of a record.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They were like songs from Swinging Cellars.
That's right. The Cellars one.
They were jokes about making a record. Isn't that extraordinary to make a record? Yeah. And that was clearly an example. I've never seen that before. Disappearing down the hole in the middle and all that. They couldn't resist those kind of jokes. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. But actually, the final track on side 2 is wonderful. It was recorded live at the Astor Club, and it's basically Professor Unwin answering most questions on manifold subtly with the press pack. There's a whole bunch of journalists there lobbing him questions, and being 1962, I think it is, they ask him about the Tottenham Hotspur double win inside. Oh, right. They ask him about Elvis Presley, that's worth it for the admission price alone. His views on Elvis in the early 60s. Music academies, he talks about avant-garde music on it. It's just sheer wonder, that album.
That's fantastic. What else you got there?
Well, next, not so much of a leap in some ways, we have King Crimson's Cat Food.
Oh, right.
Now, the reason I brought this...
Oh, wow.
On the other side, you'll see, I was not given to this normally, but I have scrawled my name there, Robert Anthony Chapman.
Right.
And now, the reason I did that was because I bought this on a Saturday when it came out, I think in April 1970, in Carousel Records in Bedford. I'll tell you a bit about Carousel in a minute.
Right.
Good. But I was on my way to a party that night, and I thought, I don't want this record getting stolen. So the only reason, I think this remains to this day, the only one of my records I've ever written on in my life. And so I took it along to the party, And so hopefully it wouldn't get stolen because it had my name on it, as if that would stop someone. But the thing is, right, this is early 1970. So to give you a bit of context, we're at the height of the skinhead movement. And I got there, and this is in Bedford as well. 90% of the people there were either sort of skinhead reggae fans or Tamala fans. And so you couldn't go an evening without hearing Tighten Up Volume 2 or Hotel and Chartbusters Volume 3. Those two albums in the early 70s, where you couldn't go to a party without hearing them.
Yeah.
And I'm upstairs with this girl, trying and tragically failing to lose my virginity. And every now and again, I heard cat food going on. It was getting played. And later on, I came back down, and it went on once, and you thought, I'd played it for a novelty. About half an hour later, after some Tamla or some Tighten Up Volume 2, it went on again. And when I came down later, it was on again, and skinheads were dancing to it. And this is a great way of illustrating how, when they rewrite the past and they compartmentalize everything and say, over here was underground and over here was reggae. It ain't true, folks. No. Everyone listened to a bit of everything and they were up for it,
Everything was various artists, A to Z, wasn't it, really? Those sections hadn't been invented. It was years later that those sections were invented.
No,
as there got to be more and more records.
And I do bang on about this a bit, but I do hate the way the past gets rewritten. And again, it runs through the book. When you get to the repeat phase, the repeat is having your past sold back to you in forms that you often don't recognise. And so when I see some of these documentaries, like a lot of people of my age, I spend a good deal of my an unhealthy part of my Friday nights shouting at BBC 4 documentaries at 9 o'clock. In fact, my wife says to me one night, if this is going to consist of you just shouting at the telly, I'm going to go and do something else. And I thought, yeah, fair enough.
It's so true. A lot of them were put together by people who weren't there at the time.
They're all put together by people who weren't there at the time.
The classic thing is punk rock. They're all about punk rock. Overnight, everybody suddenly, put in safety pins and cut their hair with plastic bin bags. You look at those early concerts, and they're playing to a load of guys who actually saw Rugulator and Dux Deluxe the night before. I've
been involved in doing something recently where I was talking to a producer. A young producer, very bright, guy in his late 30s, I would think. And it came to the punk era, and he says, and we've got to put in about the bins, about the uncollected rubbish in Leicester Square. And you think, well, you don't remember that. And also, I don't think it was at the same time. No, anyway, there's just a cliche that he's inherited,
Yeah, it was late 77, actually.
It was late 78, wasn't it, into 79?
78, maybe, yeah.
It was a winter of discontent, or
something like that, yeah. But they've been taught it at school and university, and that's the version that comes out.
Become the norm, Then along came punk and changed everything, which is why, I was that punk soldier. I was in a band, and I remember walking around Dan's house, our guitarist, Dan Katzis, who later joined the pop group, and he was playing Wazza Wazza by the Edgar Broughton Band. And it was almost like this secret society of, should we really be listening to this still? Yes, of course we can, It's Edgar Broughton, he's still great. And he was probably punk 5 years, 6 years before punk anyway, so...
all the punk, Johnny Rotten's love of Van de Graaff Generator, Adam Ant's love of kind of Rory Gallagher and all that. Of course they'd work, because they're the same age as we are, and that's what they grew up with, They just had to kind of hide it all.
Yeah, and in Viv Albertine's book, she talks about going to see Hatfield in the North. And
yes,
that's right, and the Incredible Street.
I really related to that when I read that book, so I wasn't expecting it, because, again, you kept all that quiet. You weren't being devious about it. You were, and also, we were all 21, 22. You're living for the moment. You are.
Yeah.
And it is often the Jam and the Stranglers and Richard Hell and all the other stuff you liked. But it's also the residue of everything you've ever liked up to that point.
Yeah.
You can't ignore. You can't.
No, sure. What else you got there?
Okay, well, next.
This is good.
Vouching my credentials here as Syd Barrett fan. This is my membership card for the Syd Barrett Appreciation Society.
Oh, wonderful.
So what year are we talking about there?
1972.
All right.
I never did put my picture in it or even put my address in it, but as you can see very clearly there, I am member number 15.
Oh, very good.
And in fact, early adopter.
I was, one of these. So I'm the 15th most important Syd Barrett fan in the country. In fact, I was talking to Grant Showbiz on Twitter recently, and he put his up as well, and he was number 4.
Oh wow!
but it's from that world where pre-fanzines, pre-internet, pre-everything, where it was all word of mouth and a stamped addressed envelope.
Yes,
I must have seen an advert. I must have seen a little ad for it somewhere, and I had reviewed that. I'd been to Syd Barrett's last gig at the Corn Exchange in Cambridge, which I've dined out on ever since, because I mean there were about 50 people there, and I think the only journalist there was Roy Hollingworth of Melody Maker.
Really?
Who wrote the review the next week that allegedly caused Syd to read it and think, oh, I'm packing all this in, I'm not doing this. And it was a fascinating gig. And as a result of that, I think when I mentioned it to this guy, John Steele, who ran the Appreciation Society, will you do a little write-up for us? And it was still fresh in my memory. So I did it for the Terrapin fanzine. And this was at a time when I could still remember every track he played, and even the fact that he did 2 or 3 unnamed jams, and even what he said between numbers. And so I wrote that up as a piece, and that still gets quoted in books to this day. Sometimes credited to me. More often than not, it's as if this stuff was always in the ether. No, you know that because I was at the front watching him, 2 yards away from this legend.
So what year was that?
How old would you have been?
That was February 72.
And that was pretty much the last time he performed.
That was on the Thursday night, supporting the MC5. I didn't realise this at the time, but he played again on the Saturday, and apparently the Saturday night was a bit more together. The guy I went with, he actually said to me a few days later, well, yeah, you knew he was playing on the Saturday as well. No, I didn't. I would have gone. I only lived 20 miles from Cambridge. I grew up in Sandy in Bedfordshire, 22 miles from Cambridge. A lot of my misspent youth was misspent in Cambridge.
And he was supporting the MC5.
He came on after the MC5. It was Stray, the MC5, who they were past their best by then, but they were still pretty hot.
And imagine following the MC5, this fragile character going on his own, presumably.
Well, what happened? No, he had a little band, and we Twink on drums and Jack Monk on bass. But the thing that happened was, MC5 played, and then there was basically a lull of about probably an hour, and it was getting late. It was, I think, the gig went on till 2. But by about midnight, of course, people are going for either last buses or they want a hot dog from the hot dog stand in town or whatever. People just drifted away. And by the time Syd came on, there can't have been more than 40 or 50 people left in the place.
Yeah.
And that then, and once it became quite apparent at the gig, it wasn't untogether, but it was very loose and jam-like. But gigs were like that in the early 70s anyway. That was no big deal. But again, more people drifted away. I was in rapt attention. I'd got my arms on the lip of the stage looking up at this guy. And at one point I did turn round and suddenly realised, there's only about 15, 20 of us in the place. There was those of us actually standing at the front watching him. And behind us, there was nothing. And there's one detail that Roy Hollingworth does mention in his Melody Maker piece that I remember very clearly. They had a market in there the next day, and somewhere about halfway through his set, this guy trundled a huge market barrow across the back of the Corn Exchange.
Start setting it up.
The morning market. That might have been
courgettes.
That might have been when I turned round actually and thought, what's that? But that summed up the nature of the gig. And after that, of course, Syd just disappears into legend and myth,
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I love the idea that it was a Syd Barrett Appreciation Society, which is such a wonderfully, traditional way to put it, isn't it, really?
It conjures up pictures of people just chin stroking and nodding approval. It's
like
not kind of riotous applause.
Yeah.
It is trad jazz. Yeah, pipe smoking.
There were, pipes of a sort. Yeah, there wasn't that much to talk about either because Syd had sort of disappeared, so there wasn't really any new news.
Yeah.
There were, as an NME later on, Nick Kemp would do a piece every few months saying there's been another sighting, and there'd be another story would evolve from this sighting, and that was it, Syd seen in Oxford Street, I think Roy Harper bumped into him at one point and said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Further than you'll ever know," or something, Roy Harper reported this, and then that then all becomes of the myth, part of the myth as well.
Yeah. That's very good. What's next?
What else you got there? Yeah.
Oh, you'll like this. This will have some resonance for you guys. The press pack.
Street Life magazine.
Because you start reading the press really early, don't you? I think it's 68 you started reading the press when you would have been how old?
Probably earlier.
16.
I always thought I came late to it, to be honest, but I started reading NME when I was about 12, 13.
12, that's right, yeah.
And that was only mainly for the charts and stuff like that. You know, I was just a, teeny bop pop fan at that time.
Yeah.
But that was the world I knew, NME, the world of if it was in the charts, that's what they covered, and that was fine, you know. I was always a complete printhead. I always read the mags. I always had 2 on the go at a time, and there was usually overlap. So it starts off NME and then Record Mirror, and then it became Record Mirror and Melody Maker. Then it became Melody Maker and Sounds.
Right.
Then NME, I think, went changed its whole approach and became the NME we knew and loved throughout the 70s.
Yeah.
So then it just became NME mainly for several years, with occasionally Sounds or occasionally one or two of the others. That's the shorthand version of it. But I was a complete inveterate printhead. I would read
Street Life.
I would read Melody Maker cover to cover.
Yeah. The Street Life must be what, 76, 77, isn't it? Something like that?
Yes, it's I think it's late 75 into 76. The ones I seem to have left, I've got 4 copies here from May and June 76. Yeah.
So it was fortnightly, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And what they tried to do was cover a wider sort of area of stuff than just music. And
it was supposed to be Rolling Stone, wasn't it, in many ways?
Yeah. And what you guys were doing later on with Word, indeed. You know, it was this idea.
Many years later. Yeah, go on.
But I saw that as part of the tradition. That's why I love it. That's why I love
it's pop culture, wasn't it? Movies and stuff.
I mean, when you look at the contents here, in this issue here, pieces on hang gliding, Ian Hunter, Erica Young, Tom Waits, Leonard Cohen, and Dr. Feelgood. And the front cover is Stan Bowles, the footballer.
Yes, that's brilliant. Stan Bowles. And with a piece about hang gliding, you're thinking, this is for me. That's great.
This one's got Rolling Stones, Dardis Books, Denmark's Squat City, very early Patti Smith, and Bob Marley on the cover, and they're like that. There's always a mixture of stuff, and it was an idea that the culture's grown up a bit now,
Wasn't it produced out of the Island Records offices?
I believe so.
I think it was St. Peter's Square. And wasn't the editor, why am I thinking Bill somebody? No?
I can't remember. I could have a quick look.
Sorry, there's a bit of an arcane publishing talk.
Billy Walker, you're right.
Billy Walker, who was formerly the editor of Sounds. He had been the editor of Sounds. And I think that was his idea.
Was in there.
Yes.
A guy called Steve Peacock used to write for them. I've got to tell you about Steve, because Steve later ended up at Sounds.
Yes.
When I was about 12 or 13, Steve Peacock used to write a local column in the Beds Courier, our local Thursday paper in Bedfordshire. And I took this for granted at the time. I thought all local papers must have a hip journalist writing, a really good column, It was only later on when you saw the horror of some other local magazines that not everyone had a Steve Peacock,
But obviously, he developed it as a way of getting free records out of record companies, didn't he? He wrote to the record company to say, I write for the Beds Courier or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Can I have a free copy of,
And you appeared in Melody Maker, didn't you? There's a bit in the book where you talk about writing a letter for Melody Maker and getting it published. I can't remember how old you are, very young. Big controversial.
14 to 15. It's actually the very last back page Melody Maker letter of the 1960s.
That is
brilliant. That's a great thing to do. Your first appearance in print, presumably.
I used to write to them quite often. It may not have been the first. There may have been some little letter in one of the other ones before then, probably in Record Mirror or somewhere. But that was my first big one. And it's mentioned in the book. And without plot spoiling too much, me and a friend in double biology one Thursday morning, devised it as a way of trying to win Troutmaster Replica. Because as you'll know, Melody Maker always used to have an LP
winner. That's right.
Yeah.
A gag that still endures today.
I still use it on Twitter all the time. Someone puts up a great tweet, LP winner, yeah. And when Troutmaster came out that autumn, it was quite expensive. It was about 69 and 11.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
I couldn't afford that. And we thought, well, if we write a letter to Melody Maker, let's see if we can win it to share. And my mate had this stroke of genius. He said, let's not just write the usual, the Manfred's a fab sort of letter, Let's write a really controversial letter slagging off all our heroes. And that is precisely what we did. We wrote, Dylan's gone off, gone off the ball. I mean, Captain Beefheart, who at this prime aim of writing that letter was to win a Beefheart LP. My mate Dickie called him Ad Lib Filth. He said, let's say he's Ad Lib Filth. But at the last minute, he chickened out of sending the letter. He said, no, don't put my name on it. I don't want anything to do with it. So I sent it in instead. And I signed it R.A. Chapman, my name, Robert Anthony. But because of the way my handwriting wasn't that good, and because of the way I used to loop an R and an A, it looked like an M. So when the letter was eventually printed, it says M. Chapman, Bandy, Bedfordshire. So, of course, when I took it into school, some of the snidey sixth formers looked at it. Look, that's not you.
Didn't believe it was you.
Yeah.
Yeah, as if you know anybody else who's mad about Julie Driscoll and reggae, you know. So, but there it is. When it came out, we thought nothing more of it. I get the very last Melody Maker of the 60s, and there it is. Did pop stand still in 69? Huge banner headline. And there's the pictures above it with Lennon, McCartney, Beefheart. Under Beefheart, it just says Ad Lib. I was gutted that he didn't put Ad Lib Filth.
Right.
He said Ad Lib with all my little quotes underneath. And there it was. But
so you wrote the last...
I didn't win the bloody LP.
Oh,
it was a huge letter. It filled up 3/4 of the letters column. But underneath it, there was just a very nice informed letter talking about how
great Gentle Giant were. Yes.
He won the LP. I still didn't even win the LP.
Yeah.
Never mind. You closed out the 60s for the Melody Maker. That's
I did indeed. Yeah,
that's no small thing.
With a piss take letter.
Yes,
which is also very in keeping. Yeah.
Yeah. What else you got there?
Got a couple of LPs by Sun Ra here.
Splendid.
They came out on the Saturn label, Sun Ra's own label. This one's Nadamu. This one's called The Sound Mirror. And if you notice there, I've got them autographed with the splendidly uncosmic to Rob from Sun Ra. Okay?
That is very prosaic, isn't it, for the man who claimed to have come from Saturn?
And again, yes, from Saturn, but in English, to Rob from Sun Ra.
There was taught good manners on Saturn.
They were very polite.
Now, Mark, do those ring any bells at all to you?
I'm only thinking we might have been at the same thing, because I interviewed him at the venue, and I think you might have been there. It was at the sound check, and it must have been I'm guessing probably about 1983, 82, something like that, 81.
82, I think, yeah.
82. And I was down there interviewing him for Radio 1.
That's right.
And I think you were probably there. Yeah.
And I had decided to blag my way into the sound check, which I did very successfully because I was a big Sun Ra fan, and I was quite a good blagger as well, actually. And I learned very early on that the secret is to do these things with confidence. Walk into the building like you know exactly where you're going and who you're talking to. And if someone comes up to you, you've got a ready excuse. I'm here from... You make up a fanzine. You say, I'm here for such and such fanzine, and I'm here for blah, blah, blah. In fact, nobody came up to me. In fact, the very first person I saw when I walked in the place was Mark, who actually said, yeah, you were there to interview him for some Radio 1 art show or something.
That's what it was, yeah.
Show, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I took loads of black and white photos of the band sound checking without the uniform, without the gear on, or without all the space gear, which was wonderful. And I sat chatting to John Gilmore, the legendary saxophonist, for a while. And then when it came time to do the sound, your interview, I thought I can't really go up to him on the stage and say, "Will you sign these, please?" So I gave them to you to get him to sign. And I'll set up after all these years, when you handed those back to me, I thought you'd fake them. I thought there's no way the Cosmic Sun Ra will write to Rob from Sun Ra.
Cheers! All the best, mate.
And for 20 or 30
Mind how you go, Sun Ra.
And for 20 or 30 years, I harboured that irrational grudge that you had signed those until probably about 5 or 10 years ago. I actually saw Sun Ra's signature on something that somebody had put up on the internet for signing contracts. And of course, there it was, that is the exact signature. And it was only at that moment that I realised that you had not forged those signatures.
So that'd been festering away for 30 years, has it? Resentment.
Among many other things.
Sun Ra's real name, can you remember?
Sorry?
Can you remember Sun Ra's real name? Herman Blount.
Herman Blount, yeah. and Sonny to his friends, of course.
Which is Sonny to his friends. If you were called Herman Blount, you probably would invent a name, wouldn't you?
And again, with the orchestra, people came up with all these cosmic reasons. It was a play on Egyptology and all the rest of it. And he said, no, down in the South, that's how most people pronounce orchestra anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, true.
You're in orchestra.
Yeah.
It would be.
Very
That's
good.
fantastic. What's next?
Mark, thanks for finally proving that
That's
you
fine.
make those dishes. Right.
What else you got?
Well, if we've got time for a couple more, I have a splendid little collection here of correspondences with Robert Wyatt.
Oh, okay.
The original one came about because I wanted him to contribute to the major retrospective on the soft machine that I was doing for Mojo magazine. And I wrote to him and got this very polite letter back, very polite letter saying no, because I didn't realise, I wasn't that aware of all the prehistory there was there and the bad feeling about his original departure.
They fell out very badly.
Yeah, and so the letter begins, funnily enough, a bloke this afternoon also wanted to ask me about the bad old days for a book on something called progressive rock. And then he comes up with this brilliant Wyattism. He says, what can this term mean? Chuck Berry singing the Red Flag? Which to this day is still one of my favourite definitions of progressive rock. And of course, being Robert, he's such a lovely fellow. He then he sends me this lovely chatty letter explaining all the reasons why he won't contribute to the piece, most of which was eminently quotable and actually then got included in the piece anyway. Yeah, of course. And then after that, I've interviewed Robert a couple of times since then, one for Mojo Collections and one, I can't remember the other one, which involved going to his house in Louth in Lincolnshire. And he's such a nice bloke. You end up in a kind of correspondence with him anyway. Lots of other journalists have said this. You'll get phone calls, you'll get letters. Now, when Robert sends letters, he sends postcards and he sends them on whatever is to hand. So, for example, this one was on a Saucy Cleethorpes postcard, which says, drop everything and come to Cleethorpes. And also, again, as people mentioned, it's mentioned in that splendid biography of Robert that came out a while ago. He will just cut out bits of soap boxes or breakfast cereal boxes or whatever. So I've got one here on the back of an Ahmed tea.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Box.
Yeah.
This one is on low cot. Times must have been harder by the time of this one. And this is how you get these correspondence. And the guy who wrote the biography said he's strongly suggesting that there should be an exhibition of these because lots of people have them.
There will be. If he sent that many to you, he'll have sent hundreds.
Yeah, it's a book. Actually, that's a book, isn't it? That would be a brilliant.
It's at least an art exhibition and probably a book to go with it. Buy the book too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's that generation, isn't it? I mean, it's going back to the Beatles. John Lennon was an inveterate postcard writer, wasn't he? Throughout his life.
Constantly writing to the Melody Maker and stuff.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Because it's a habit that they gained early on. And
Viv Stanchel did the same thing. Viv Stanchel used to send, I got loads actually, of Viv Stanchel cards from seaside resorts, talking about whelks. Wonderful.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
That really is good.
Richard Williams said that he had a wonderful relationship with Lennon. He said Lennon was the only star he knew he would phone you up a couple of days later and say, did you get everything you needed?
Yes.
Have you got enough there?
Yeah. Well, also he's a big reader, wasn't he, John Lennon? So whatever you wrote, he would read.
Yeah.
He read the Melody Maker and all those things throughout his life.
Yes,
so, Rob, it's been fantastic seeing your stuff. Traditionally on these things, people climax with we ask people, we invite people to nominate the greatest record ever made. Single, LP, anything you like, be as wild as you like and conventional as you like. Over to you.
Well, that probably changes on a weekly or monthly basis. But recently, I have been edging towards the indisputable fact that the greatest record ever made is, in fact, MacArthur Park by Richard Harris. Whenever I hear it on the radio now, a lot of these things, they become familiar to you. MacArthur Park just gets more epic every time I hear it. I always love the grandeur of it. I love the sheer overreachingness of it. Because I think pop should be all about that. I think pop should always be overreaching. It should be trying to do the impossible. And to put out a 7.5-minute single like that at the time was wonderful. it also contains the greatest opening lyric in a song anywhere.
Spring was never waiting for us, dear.
Girl.
Oh, girl, that's right. Yeah.
Dear.
Sorry.
It ran one step ahead as we followed in the dance.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, that's Elizabethan poetry. That's beautiful.
It is.
That's very good.
And I recently read Jim Webb's autobiography. Have you read that book?
Yes,
he wrote terrific.
Yes, yeah.
It's been out a couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Yes, yeah. I interviewed him at the time.
There's a great bit in. Yes, as you know, the Ad Lib pretty much ends on my interview with Jim Webb. I shouldn't really plot spoil like that, but that was I interviewed him when I was very ill and was about to go into hospital for treatment, thinking it might be the last interview I ever did. And if it was, so be it. Let's talk to the man who wrote Wish It to Lie Man and MacArthur Park. We had a wonderful chat. But in that book, he mentions that if you listen to it, Richard Harris always sings MacArthur's Park. It's MacArthur Park. That's the name of the park. And they kept trying to take him to one side and said, Richard, it's MacArthur, singular MacArthur. But they couldn't get him to change it. He sings MacArthur's Park every time. And it's wrong. There is no MacArthur's Park. Again, which is perfectly in keeping. But that's my favourite record. And the fact that a 7.5-minute epic has a 1.5-minute track on the B-side called Paper Chase. Because, again, that's the only thing to put on the B-side of a record that grand. This lovely little ditty called Paper Chase.
Fabulous. And that brilliant image about the cake in the rain, which everybody remembers and takes some getting used to.
And of course, wasn't it a #1 record? It was, wasn't it?
It was in America. And I don't think it made #1 here. It got to #1 in America. And people forget this now, but it was released with a certain amount of pre-publicity. There was a lot in the papers about this amazing 7.5-minute magnum opus that Jim Webb's done, and it's climbing up the charts in America. And I can remember reading my NME and looking at the Billboard or Cashbox top 30 they would have there, and there it was, this record. And so when it came out, it already had
head of steam.
And of course, when you did hear it, you think, oh God, yes, this is epic.
Yeah,
and it
certainly is. It still is to this day. So, Rob, your book, we don't have to tell people to go to a bookshop and buy this, do we? Because this is
Kindle.
It's something for Kindle, so it's available however you would normally buy a Kindle book via Amazon, I suppose. I don't know. Is it Amazon?
Yeah, it is at the moment. I mean, I wanted to get it published, but we couldn't get it placed. My agent couldn't get it placed anywhere. And I thought, this book's it means too much to me not to put out. I've got all kinds of unfinished stuff on my hard drive, and that's where they can stay until they're finished. But this one, it meant a lot to me to get my story out there. And so I went the self-publishing route in the end, and it spent the weekend it came out hovering between 20 and 50 in the best-selling music books on Kindle, so on Amazon.
Well, rightly so. It really is a fantastic book, Rob.
As I said earlier, it's full of stuff that you wouldn't read anywhere else, and particularly for anybody who grew up in the 50s and the 60s will find a shock of being reminded of things that will have slipped their mind, because Rob, as he says, is cursed with a perfect recall of these kind of things. It's been delightful to talk to you. All the very best. And we shall maybe see you in physical space at some point when this bloody war is over.
Yeah,
okay?
Dream on.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Great to see you, Rob.
Bye.
Thanks very much.